Abstract art doesn't ask for permission, and it certainly doesn't wait for understanding. It arrives unannounced, unapologetic, and often misunderstood, which is exactly where this channel, Art Unfiltered, plants its flag, right in the middle of the chaos, because here we're not interested in polite interpretations or safe, predictable meanings. We're here to tear apart the quiet assumptions about what art is supposed to be and rebuild it in ways that feel raw, honest, and sometimes uncomfortable. And if you've ever stood in front of a canvas splashed with color and thought, "I don't get it," you're already exactly where you need to be, because abstract art isn't a puzzle with a single solution. It's a confrontation, a mirror, a moment where your instincts matter more than explanations. And that's what we explore on this channel, not the textbook definitions or the rehearsed gallery speeches, but the pulse underneath the paint, the movement behind the mark, the emotion that refuses to be translated into neat sentences. Because the truth is, abstract art is less about what you see and more about what you bring with you when you look. Your memories, your moods, your biases, your questions, all of it colliding with the artist's own invisible world. And somewhere in that collision, something real happens, something that doesn't need a label to exist. And yet for decades, people have tried to box it in, to categorize it, to measure its worth based on technique or resemblance or market value. But abstract art resists all of that. It slips through definitions. It challenges authority. It dares you to feel instead of analyze. And that can be unsettling, especially in a world that trains us to look for clear answers. But discomfort isn't a flaw here. It's the point. Because when you're unsure, when you're questioning, when you're leaning in instead of stepping back, you're actually engaging with the work in the most authentic way possible. And that's where the conversation begins, not with certainty, but with curiosity. And on Art Unfiltered, we don't shy away from that uncertainty. We lean into it. We break down the myths that say abstract art is random or meaningless. Because it's not. It's intentional, even when it looks chaotic. Even when it feels spontaneous. There's a dialogue happening between control and release, between thought and instinct, and every artist navigates that balance differently. Some build layers meticulously over time, others attack the canvas in a single burst of energy. But in both cases, there's a story embedded in the process, not always a narrative in the traditional sense, but a record of decisions, gestures, and moments that can't be replicated. And that's something you start to notice when you stop asking, "What is this supposed to be?" and start asking, "What is this doing to me?" Because that shift changes everything. It turns passive viewing into active experience. And suddenly the work isn't distant or inaccessible. It's immediate, it's personal. It's alive in a way that representational art sometimes isn't. Because there's no predefined subject guiding your response. It's just you and the piece, negotiating meaning in real time, and that negotiation is messy. It's subjective. It's different for everyone, which is why two people can stand in front of the same painting and walk away with completely different impressions, and neither of them is wrong. Because abstract art doesn't operate on right or wrong interpretations. It thrives on multiplicity, on contradiction, on the idea that meaning isn't fixed but fluid. And that fluidity is what makes it so powerful, especially in a world that often tries to reduce complexity into simple binaries. Abstract art pushes back against that reduction. It says no. Things can be ambiguous. Things can be unresolved. Things can exist without a clear explanation, and that's not a weakness. It's a strength, because it reflects the way we actually experience life, not as a series of neatly packaged answers, but as an ongoing process of questioning and feeling and reinterpreting. And when you start to see abstract art through that lens, it stops being intimidating and starts being liberating, because you realize you don't need permission to engage with it. You don't need a degree in art history or a vocabulary full of technical terms. All you need is your own perspective. Your willingness to look, to feel, to sit with something that doesn't immediately make sense. And that's what we're building here on Art Unfiltered. A space where that kind of engagement is not only welcomed but encouraged, where we strip away the gatekeeping and the pretense and get back to the core of what art is supposed to do, which is to connect, to provoke, to move us in ways that are sometimes hard to articulate. And we'll dive into the process, the materials, the choices that artists make. Not to demystify the work, but to deepen the appreciation of it, to show that behind every seemingly chaotic canvas there's a series of decisions, conscious or subconscious, that shape the final piece. And will also challenge the narratives that have historically excluded certain voices from the conversation. Because abstract art, like any form of expression, is not owned by a single culture or perspective. It's a global language, one that has been spoken in different ways across different contexts, and yet often presented through a narrow lens. And here we're going to widen that lens. We're going to highlight diversity, question authority, and create a dialogue that feels inclusive and honest. Because art doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's influenced by the world around it, by politics, by identity, by personal experience. And abstract art is no exception. Even when it doesn't depict recognizable subjects, it still carries the imprint of its context. And exploring that context can open up new layers of understanding without limiting the personal interpretation. Because it's not about replacing your perspective with a correct one. It's about adding depth, adding dimension, allowing multiple readings to coexist. And that's where things get interesting. That's where art becomes a conversation instead of a monologue. And you, as a viewer, are not just an observer but a participant in that conversation. Your reactions, your questions, your interpretations all matter. And that's something we're going to emphasize again and again on this channel. Because too often people are made to feel like their responses to art are invalid if they don't align with some established narrative. And that's simply not true, especially in the realm of abstraction, where subjectivity is not just accepted but essential. And yes, we'll talk about technique, about composition, about color theory, about the historical movements that have shaped abstract art. But we'll do it in a way that feels accessible, not academic for the sake of being academic, but insightful in a way that enhances your experience rather than dictates it. Because at the end of the day, art is not about memorizing facts. It's about engaging with something beyond yourself, something that can challenge your perspective or reflect it back to you in unexpected ways. And abstract art does that in a uniquely direct manner, because it bypasses literal representation and goes straight to sensation, to emotion, to the intangible aspects of human experience. And that's why it continues to resonate, even when it confuses, even when it frustrates. Because beneath that confusion there's a kind of freedom, the freedom to interpret, to feel, to connect without boundaries. And that's what Art Unfiltered is all about. Embracing that freedom, exploring that space, and inviting you to be part of it. Not as a passive audience, but as an active voice in the ongoing conversation about what art is, what it can be, and why it matters, even when it refuses to explain itself. Title description 3 hashed.